what you want, when you want it, where you want it. This is The Mesh.
For organizations looking to enhance their customer relationships, this is Stepping Up Service. Hello and welcome to Stepping Up Service here on themesh.tv. This is our ongoing podcast show talking about the world of customer service. How do we provide excellent customer service to those customers and coworkers around us? What are some of the pitfalls of delivering bad customer service? And how can we use a stronger customer service culture to improve our organization as a whole? My name is Alan Jackson with the Jackson Group. We specialize in customer and employee satisfaction and engagement surveys for a variety of industries. And with me, as always, my co-host on this podcast, Ed Gagnon with Customer Service Solutions. Ed, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Alan. And I noticed the last couple podcasts that you don't call me your partner in crime anymore.
I know.
I was wondering.
That phrase got a little played after a while. So I'm trying to come up with a new catchphrase for you. And I'm still deliberating. I'm still deciding on a few options. I should have something chosen here pretty soon, I think. So
okay.
If you have any suggestions or any listeners, any suggestions of how I should refer to Ed, I would definitely take your suggestions.
Well, it could be like Batman to your Robin. I don't think I'd say Superman to your Batman based on the movies coming out these days. that might imply conflict on our podcast, which we do have at times, but I don't know. I'll think on that.
Well, speaking of big blockbuster superhero movies, I might remind everybody there's another show on this network called Foot Candle Films where, lo and behold, we just actually reviewed said superhero battle film in the last few days. And the results may surprise you. So tune that in and listen to that episode. Anyway, let me come back to our main show here. So Ed, as we talk about customer service in our ongoing series here, we talk about different aspects of customer service, things that different elements that make up a really healthy or in some situations unhealthy customer service culture in an organization. We've used a word in passing from time to time when we talk about customer reactions or how customers are feeling treated by the people they're dealing with in organizations. That's come up from time to time. That idea is respect, or more specifically, disrespect. Customers feeling disrespected. And like we've been known to do on some specific terms in the past, sometimes these words, they're a very broad word, but they actually have some very specific meanings behind them. And I think what we want to do in today's conversation is talk about this concept of disrespect. And I think you've got some thoughts on how the concept of disrespect has impact on a customer service experience that we can provide.
Yes, definitely. And the reason why this is so important is, as a discussion topic, is that respect is so important to customers nowadays. It's interesting if you hear complaints from customers, you read complaints online, oftentimes they talk about being disrespected or they were dissed or something along those lines, some kind of term like that is used. So what we're going to do today is define respect and then flip it, define disrespect, and then we'll talk about what exactly can cause a customer to feel that way. What happens in that one-on-one moment of truth, that customer experience that can really cause them to feel disrespected, and then how do we try to avoid those types of situations, those types of feelings.
And I think this is a good conversation to have because you hear people will just use the word, I didn't feel respected or I felt disrespected in that example. And I think there's a lot of ways that I think employees or people dealing with customers could probably define that or try to interpret that. Right. And what we're really talking about is there's a very specific set of emotions or feelings behind the word respect or the opposite of disrespect, right?
Yes, definitely. I mean, if you think about the word respect and you go to just a standard dictionary definition of it, if you respect somebody, it's almost like you're admiring somebody deeply. You admire their abilities, their qualities, their achievements, something like that. So, I mean, there's a little bit of emotion involved if you really respect somebody. There's an emotional component to that oftentimes. So when you think about disrespect, there's also an emotional component to disrespect. Now, the way the internet defines disrespect, and this is, I'm sure, 100% accurate because it came from the internet.
Oh, yes, absolutely. But, everything online is completely accurate. So sure.
Exactly. So it's more of a lack of courtesy or an insult. But maybe a better way, maybe a more raw way to look at the concept of disrespect is to look at the definition of dissed. If you've ever heard, I was dissed, or that person dissed me. I mean, the definition of dissed you could view as being rude to somebody, criticizing them in a way that shows disrespect, treating them with contempt even. Here are some examples of how somebody might use the word diss. And I don't necessarily use this a ton, Alan, so you'll have to really interpret my tone of voice with this. But why you be dissing me?
Yeah, this is painful.
Don't diss me, bro. Yes. Or how about the wonderful, don't you go dissing somebody just because you've got a few more dead presidents than they do. And Alan right now is red. He's heaving. He's about to fall off his chair. So I know this is not a video podcast, obviously, if there was such a thing. But
best episode of Stepping Up Service ever. I'm just going to say it right now. We're 5 minutes in, and I'm loving this. But back to what you're saying. Yes, I mean the concept of dissing. I mean, there's a reason why I think DIS, the part that we see before the negative connotations of words such as disrespect. It's this whole idea of putting off somebody. It seems like it's this whole, I don't value any more of what you have to say, or I don't value your presence in the situation. And I totally see the connection there. And it's interesting how I never really thought about how it's pulling the dis from a like disrespect or disregard. And that's become that slang term now. So that's interesting.
Yes, and I'm glad you recovered enough to speak in complete coherent sentences, Alan. I was worried about you there for a second.
I'm getting us back on a professional track here.
So I, oftentimes in training, I'll talk about respect and disrespect, and I'll ask the participants before we actually get into a discussion about what do we do about disrespect, overcome it, how do we make sure we convey respect. I just ask the participants in training to give me examples of what respect looks like, and then I'll kind of flip it and say, well, then what does disrespect look like? And when they talk about respect, they often talk about eye contact, show that you listen, appropriate tone of voice, engaging somebody with attentive expressions, body language. Those are the ways that people feel like they're being treated with respect, or the converse of that. If they don't feel like they're getting the eye contact, they don't feel like you're listening, they don't feel like the tone of voice is right, they don't feel like you're being attentive to their needs, that's when the disrespect kicks in. So it's really interesting that a lot of what they talk about has nothing to do with the words the employee says. It's a lot of the nonverbal communication that goes on. There's a lack of communication. Yeah. So what I'd like to do with you is I'm actually going to give you some very specific examples of how somebody could convey disrespect. And then I'm going to ask you to kind of piggyback on these, see if you can come up with additional ideas. Does that sound good, Alan?
Absolutely, sure.
Now, I will tell you that there are no points or bonus points or awards for today. This is purely tapping into your brain, Alan, without any kind of carrot at the end.
Well, my enthusiasm's diminished greatly, but
it has.
We'll go ahead and go with it. I'll allow it this episode. So please continue. Right.
We'll get back on track at the next episode,
Perfect.
Alan. So it's going to be all about you again. And by the way, I see you holding up your Carolina mug despite the championship game. So I'm glad that you're still in support of your team.
Oh, absolutely, yes. Heartbreaking. Yes. We don't talk about it much in my house. I'm not. The kids are not allowed to ask me any more questions about the game or anything else. So we just kind of pretend like it didn't happen. So
yes.
Yeah.
Well, I have to apologize before we go into these specific examples. I realize I'm playing with your emotions today, Alan, because we started out by you being almost falling off your chair in laughter, your face turning red, hard to breathe. And I followed that up with today's podcast is not about you. And oh, by the way, your favorite basketball team lost. So I don't mean to play with your emotions.
I'm on a roller coaster of emotions right now. So, just people just follow along for the ride. So,
okay.
All right.
Well, the first way people can show disrespect is obviously with their tone of voice. And these are specific examples we see over and over again. If the employee talks over the customer or the employee interrupts the customer, oftentimes that a customer is going to feel disrespected. If the employee is talking loudly or they're very short, curt, or they're talking very fast, like they're trying to rush through the conversation, there might be that feeling of disrespect. Or one thing that happens a ton, and this is a little bit more nuanced, but if the employee in their tone of voice somehow is being condescending, talking down to that customer, then the customer may feel disrespected. Can you think of any other tone-related actions by the employee that could make a customer feel disrespected?
I could see a tone of a little hint of sarcasm could be used. I mean, very slight. I could see somebody using, even though the words, what they're saying may be accurate, but the way they're saying it from a sarcastic tone, maybe it could definitely hit that disrespect button, I'm sure, with customers. You mentioned about the quickness. That was the one I was going to say, just trying to talk fast, almost like you're hustling them along. You may be following the perfect script with your words, but if you're saying it in that kind of quick way of just, I need to get moving on, that's definitely a level of disrespect as well. And even just the enthusiasm behind the voice. I mean, again, if you read a script that may be the perfect words that you're supposed to say, but if you're saying it in a very, kind of just it's exhausted, almost just a tone of just, I really don't care. I'm saying these things, but you can tell in my voice I'm really not into this conversation. I could see all those hitting that disrespect button pretty easily.
Yeah, that's a great example. Like, for example, if I was to say something like, Alan, I am so terribly upset for you that your Tar Heels loss, it is crushing to me. There's nothing I'd rather do right now than, somehow get a win for the Tar Heels for you. Would that be disrespectful, Alan?
Yeah, absolutely.
Or just cruel?
Well,
Yes,
both, all of the above. But the disrespect is definitely there because to me, anytime you know that the words they're saying are not matching the emotion in which they're saying it, to me, that smacks of a level of disrespect.
Right. And body language is somewhat similar to tone. Again, we're not necessarily talking about the specific words as much as how they're delivered. And body language, these are some specific examples. If the employee's talking and their arms are crossed, or they're supposedly listening to the customer with their arms crossed, or the employee literally puts their hand up, kind of in a stopping position in front of that customer, or it's the finger pointing by the employee, or rolling the eyes. I mean, are there any other examples that you can think of that are very disrespectful, that maybe it's just the way the employee is, the way they communicate, they don't mean it this way, but examples of body language that could come across as being disrespectful?
Well, I always have a hard time when people say that if somebody's not looking directly at you when they're talking, that's disrespectful, because I know there's a lot of people who have a really hard time with affixing constant eye contact with someone when they're talking. That's a difficult skill. It really is uncomfortable for people. I don't see that as disrespect, but I can tell if somebody is looking past you. In other words, they're almost like they're not intentionally looking away because they're just uncomfortable making direct eye contact, but they're actually looking beyond you at something else, or something else has got their attention. And it's very obvious that they're not really paying attention to you at that point. I do think there's a difference between paying attention without direct eye contact and not paying attention by being affixed on something else. And to me, that definitely shows some disrespect levels there as well.
Yeah, those are excellent observations. I mean, and for those folks who are less comfortable with the constant eye contact, the trick there is when their eyes are not on the customer, make sure they're on something that conveys respect. Maybe they're on their notebook where they're taking some notes, and their eyes are going from the notebook to the customer, from the notebook to the customer, as opposed to the eyes wandering and looking at other people in the room, or glancing down at the phone or something like that. Those are excellent points.
Yeah, I always feel bad when people say, "Oh, you've got to have direct eye contact the whole time." That's a really tough thing to do. If you've really ever paid attention, trying to keep eye contact with somebody during an entire conversation is really tricky. But I do think you can tell, and I like your idea of have a notepad or something that at least if you're not comfortable keeping the eye contact there, at least something that shows that I'm engaged in this conversation. So
right. And sometimes it's a little bit of an aside, but sometimes it's inappropriate to have constant eye contact. There were actually, this is, I want to say 3 or 4 years ago, I can't recall the supermarket chain, but a supermarket chain put into their customer service or customer service standards expectations of employees that all the clerks would make constant eye contact with the customers when they were checking them out. Well, several of the female employees actually complained to the company, may have even sued the company because some of the male customers thought that the clerks were hitting on them because of the constant eye contact.
Yeah.
So, it's just that sort of thing that, everything in moderation, as they say. But you just want to be a little bit careful if you have the constant eye contact and having that being misinterpreted at times.
Absolutely.
Yeah. One thing people don't think a lot about when they think about respect, but it's very important, is to think about wait times. The idea of being respectful of other people's times. Sometimes we don't think of it as being disrespectful, but if somebody's been sitting in a waiting room for an hour, or if somebody's been on hold for a long time, or if somebody some employees doing other things while the customer's present, it's delaying the transaction. Many customers can perceive that as being disrespectful of my time.
Okay,
so you're not necessarily doing anything, but you're wasting my time by doing other things that are really not helping me to get my goal achieved, or helping me to get off the phone and do other things, or whatever the case might be. So this is something companies don't think about a lot, but a lot of customers can feel disrespected if there are excessive wait times.
That's a good point. I was trying to think through situations where something away from a human interaction could be perceived as disrespect. And you're right, it's wait time. I can't think of many other examples outside of human interaction that can be regarded as disrespectful, but definitely the wait time or wasting of my time is absolutely something that somebody could translate as a disrespectful measure. So,
yeah. And the last category of disrespect that an employee could convey that we're going to go through, I'm just going to hit a laundry list. These are different actions, different words, different things. If you, as an employer, are talking on the phone while the customer is standing in front of you, the customer could feel disrespected. If you're talking with a coworker, just chit-chatting while the customer is waiting for you to serve them, that can be considered disrespect.
Absolutely.
Yeah. If you are talking about the customer while the customer is present and you're not engaging the customer in that conversation, and this is big in healthcare, where you have a couple of healthcare workers talking about a patient, the patient's in the room, but they're talking about the patient as if the patient is not in the room, as if the patient is just a subject or a task or something like that. Talking about the customer while they're present without including the customer, that can be considered very disrespectful.
Absolutely.
Another healthcare example, and this happens a lot now in physician practices. If that physician or that tech is looking at the computer while they're engaged with the customer, because they have to get all that medical information into the computer, and they are so locked in on that computer that they're not engaging with their eye contact at all, that customer, that can be considered disrespect.
Yes.
We do a lot of work with educational organizations, and one thing, especially when you're dealing with high school and you're dealing with college and you're dealing with university students, is if you criticize a student in front of other students, in front of their peers, that can just incite that student to get irate, upset, to throw a big fit because they feel like you've dissed them in front of their peers, or they maybe have to put on a show. So criticizing a student in front of other students, an easy way for a student or a customer to feel disrespected. 3 more.
Okay.
When you're discussing blame, using the word you. This happened. If you wouldn't have done this, when you did this, if you're talking to a customer and you use you when talking about blame, they can feel disrespected. They can get defensive. Boom. There's your irate customer situation.
Absolutely.
Second, if they feel like you're ignoring them. Third, if you answer a question they didn't ask. So it's something like, I'm really curious, what's the process of signing up for this service? Well, sir, the service is $87, and if you want to upgrade, I'd really suggest that you upgrade for this service. You have the basic TV package, but the other TV package is $135. You get all these additional channels. Wait, I just wanted to know what the process was.
Right.
If I wanted to do it, how would I do it?
It's almost a matter of it's almost like where if a customer perceives that employee is trying to do something, a little more selfish, whether it's trying to upsell something, whether it's trying to get you going in a different direction, distract you from something, it's very obvious. And then when customers pick up on that, you're saying that's a level of disrespect as well.
Exactly. So these are just a series of different things that maybe the employee doesn't mean anything by it, maybe the company doesn't mean anything by it, but all of a sudden the customer feels disrespected. So we have to understand that our customers' time, their goals, how they feel, is important to them. So we have to respect them with the body language, with the tone, with what they say, with the quality of what we do, the responsiveness, etc. And before we go to our break, I'm just kind of curious to get your impression, Alan. If you were to kind of be a fly on the wall and you're watching this customer-employee interaction, and the employee's obviously doing some of these specific things that can create disrespect, what could happen when that employee is creating disrespect? What might that customer do, or what could happen to that organization, to that employee, if that disrespect is being conveyed?
Well, a couple different paths. It depends on the type of personality of the customer. You're going to either have the ones that are going to be frustrated during that experience and very visibly frustrated, and maybe saying something about feeling like they're being disrespected or feeling frustrated. What I think is actually worse is where they're going to leave without saying anything and either going to tell family, friends, other people about how they felt disrespected. And I can't think of a worse recommendation to not go somewhere than to say, I really felt disrespected there. That's a strong phrase. I can't imagine anybody, if one of my close friends told me I felt disrespected when I went to this place of business, it would be a hard situation for me to convince myself of any reason why I would need to go there myself.
Wow.
You've got lack of sales, you've got poor reputation out in the business place, filing complaints. I could definitely see a complaint coming back, and that would hit the employee themselves. That caused that level of disrespect. That's a strong word, disrespect. It's worse to me than just rude. Rude is a little more of a transient thing. It's like somebody can just be rude with one simple action, but a disrespect is a much more of I am really treating you as a customer at a whole different negative light.
Yes.
And I got to imagine there's just a lot of negative ramifications for a business and the employee when that word disrespect is floated around.
Yeah, and I loved how you phrased that one point in particular about if you had via word of mouth a friend, a colleague, a family member say that business disrespected me. I mean, how many people are really going to want to patronize that business if their family member was disrespected?
Exactly.
I mean, you wouldn't want to go within 10 miles of that particular organization. So, and I know a lot of our clients, a lot of the folks listening to this podcast think, well, I would never be disrespectful. And maybe that's true intentionally, but here is the question. If you ever have had a customer and they just stopped coming, if you ever have noticed that there are a lot of complaints being voiced, or you don't get high ratings on your satisfaction surveys, if you ever notice customers getting upset and you don't know why, if you ever see your conversations seemingly be longer than they really need to be, these are symptoms of problems, and maybe the root cause is, for whatever reason, that customer is feeling disrespected. And when you start seeing the symptoms of these problems, the complaints, the upset, the emotions, the lack of customers returning, the retention, the lack of cross-sell, upsell, those issues being escalated to your boss, those conversations getting longer, maybe your reputation in the community, like you mentioned, not being as high as you would want it to be, if you start seeing some of these issues, then you need to start saying, well, what is within my control that may have impacted or caused this to occur? And maybe, for whatever reason, not intentionally, obviously, but for whatever reason, that customer is feeling disrespected.
That's right. That's you hit on the real danger there, is that most customers are not just going to come right out and say to you, I felt disrespected by what you just said, or I felt disrespected by the way this happened. It would be a much easier world to rectify problems and fix things if everybody was told exactly what happened to cause a problem right when it happened. But it doesn't happen that way. Most of the time, It's the customer leaves, and they feel that way. They tell everybody about that, and then you're losing business. And unless you're really paying attention, you don't quite know why, like you said. And that's the scary part about it, is that this is just like rudeness, just like other little things. with a process, you can see when a process is breaking down. If you see that all of your order times are not hitting their deadlines, and you see that there's a lot of returns coming back on a quality product, that's something that you see as a business person. You understand, oh, wow, this is a problem. We need to fix it. Disrespect, I mean, you're not going to be told a lot of times when customers feel disrespected. You've got to know what the symptoms could be, like you just said, to be aware of them. And that's it's a tough thing. It really is. I know it's tough.
Yeah, it's very tough. So we're going to talk about how do we try to avoid situations where the customer might feel disrespected. When we come back from the break, we're actually going to talk about specific things you can do to make sure we're conveying respect and we're not even inadvertently crossing that line to disrespect and causing some of these problems that we just described.
Sounds like a plan. So what we'll do is let's take a quick break. And when we do come back, we will follow up on this conversation, talking about some ideas and tactics to help make sure we avoid that word disrespect ever being floated around from our employees or our organizations. I'm Alan Jackson with the Jackson Group. I'm speaking with Ed Gagnon of Customer Service Solutions. You're listening to Stepping Up Service here on themesh.tv, and we'll be right back. Hi, I'm Alan.
I'm Chris.
And we're the co-hosts of Foot Candle Films, a movie review and film discussion show here on themesh.tv.
Each episode, we talk about some new movies, cover some film news, and have some recommendations.
And trust us, we're just as likely to talk about the latest Jim Jarmusch film as we are the newest Transformers installment.
Hold on, don't get too crazy.
Well, okay, maybe not that bad. But you can find our show and all our episodes on themesh.tv. Plus, you can subscribe to get new episodes delivered right to your computer or mobile device.
We'll see you in the ticket line.
Welcome back to Stepping Up Service here on themesh.tv. Before we continue, just a quick reminder that you are listening to this podcast, free audio podcast on themesh.tv. If you're interested in other audio content similar in subject matter or looking at something completely different, we recommend going on the website themesh.tv, and that is THEMESH.tv. And when you do so, you will be seeing all of the shows that we have on our network. Everything from, there's been sports shows from past seasons. We've got shows about caring for aging parents. We've got film review shows. We've got everything in between you can imagine. We've got Chick Chat. That's one of our popular shows there that is always a fun time to listen to. So a lot of great shows. We encourage you to give it a listen to. All of the shows are free. You can subscribe to them through any of your own audio or podcast programs on your mobile device or computer or tablet or whatever it may be. And we archive all of the episodes in the past. So even for Stepping Up Service, you can go all the way back in the archives and start listening with episode number 1, which I encourage you to do this weekend. Download all of the past episodes. It's a weekend full of great information and education. And what better way than to spend your weekend with headphones on, listening to Ed and Alan talk about customer service? I think it'd be great.
Yes.
But it's all there. But in all seriousness, if there are specific topics, you can go and search for those topics on the website and see if there's some episodes we've recorded to deal with that. And if there isn't, we encourage you to reach out to us and let us know of any topics you'd like for us to discuss or consider discussing in a future episode. So, Ed, as we come back talking about disrespect, the first half of the episode, we really were talking about the definition of disrespect. What does it mean? What are some of the symptoms of it? And then what could be the impact on our organization if customers feel disrespected? So you kind of set us up for the second half to talk about this idea of what are some tactics or ideas or things we can do with employees, with our organization, to try to avoid that label of disrespect that is so dangerous for our organization.
Yes, so we're going to look at this to some extent from a tactical standpoint. What can each individual person do? We'll look at this in some cases from the organizational standpoint. But when we talk about specific actions you can take or things you can do to avoid being perceived as being disrespectful, we're going to use these same 4 categories we just talked about when we looked at examples of disrespect. So we'll talk about tone of voice.
Tone of voice,
talk
right.
about body language.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about wait times. Talk about just other actions, other phrases in general. So let's start with tone of voice.
Okay.
When you think about your tone of voice, make sure that you're really cognizant of the volume of your voice. The louder you are, generally speaking, the more likely that you could be viewed as being disrespectful. So typically have a lower voice or mid-level voice. I was talking to somebody who used to be a prison guard in New York City or New York State, excuse me. And she talked about how she tried to diffuse situations. And one of the things she said was, if they're talking loud, they're being very agitated, she talks even more quietly, because it's very difficult to have an argument with somebody who's almost whispering. So if you want to really come across respectfully, you really come across as being aggressive, loud, and maybe coming across as being disrespectful, that's when you go really loud. So adjust your voice level, the volume down a little bit. Second point is to try to have a little bit of variability in your voice. You talked about flat and monotone, and how if you communicate in a certain way, it can really contradict your words and sound sarcastic. So make sure you have some variability, some up and down, a few pauses here and there. Don't go flat. Flat conveys that you don't care, you're not that interested. So modify your speed and cadence a little bit as well. And then finally, with your tone of voice, make sure that you're using your voice to emphasize certain key words. So thank you very much for this. Or from what I understand, your main priority is the wait time. Is that correct? So if you emphasize certain key points, then that customer knows, yes, this person gets what's most important to me, or this person is really focused on what my need is and what my particular point is. So when you a little bit lower with your tone of voice to convey more respect, have a little bit of variability, some up and down, not the flat monotone, have a little pace to it, but put in some stops and starts there, and then emphasize certain key points, especially if you are reinforcing what that customer just told you, to convey that you've listened well, you've heard what their need or issue or desire is.
Now, I can already hear some people who may be listening to this saying, well, my tone of voice is what it is. I don't have a lot of variability in my tone of voice. I'm a very monotone person. I tend to say things very fast or very loud or whatever it may be. What do you recommend? I mean, somebody who's that's just the way I talk. I mean, are we telling them they've got to kind of force themselves out of that shell? And if so, how can they do that? How can they best kind of try to work on that?
Yes. Excellent question. 3 thoughts. Number 1 is role play.
Wow, okay,
and get feedback. Just sit down with a coworker, with a supervisor, with somebody else, and basically have them present a need or an issue or request as a customer to you. You interact, and then have them evaluate you. And you can do this with body language too, which we'll discuss in a minute, but have them evaluate your tone of voice, evaluate your body language, because for many people, they're just really not self-aware of how they come across. So the first thing is role play. The second is to listen to yourself. So literally just record yourself when you're engaged with a customer. You can record yourself. You don't have to worry about recording the customer's voice, obviously. I know there's certain legal things you need to do, but you can record your voice. So listen to how you truly sound. One of the first speech class I ever took, I saw myself on video actually giving a speech, and it was eye-opening, because I knew certain things I did okay, I knew certain things I didn't do okay, but I really didn't have a sense of how I came across to others until I saw myself. And then all of a sudden I was the audience of me presenting. So if you can listen to yourself and kind of view yourself as the audience of yourself, then it might help you to really understand what that customer is experiencing. Third thing is, yes, you might have to alter your approach a little bit based on what you've heard in the role play, what you've viewed when you've listened to yourself. But even though you're doing that, the third thing really is, if you are self-aware now of how you come across to others. And we have a lot of clients like this who they come from the Northeast and they talk fast. They will literally tell the customer, just to let you know, I'm talking a little fast. It's just kind of how I am, from being from up north. So, if I'm talking too fast at any point in time and anything's unclear, just let me know. Make a little bit of a joke about it. Okay. Be clear and upfront with the customer so they understand you're not doing that to talk over them. You're not doing that because you lack patience, just kind of how you are. It helps to establish a rapport a little bit. So the third way really is, if you've done everything you can to modify and yet you're still who you are and you still can't make that last adjustment, just kind of be open with the customer. let them know. Use it as an opportunity to establish a little bit of rapport with the customer.
That's a good point. A good point.
Yeah.
And the thing is obviously if somebody's really adamant and feels like they're meant for a role with customer service, direct customer service, but the tone of voice is an issue for them, I think getting that feedback and just being honest with yourself, from the feedback you receive. And, but you're right. That third option, I mean, if you can kind of just dispel that concern right up the front, that does go a long way. I mean, I'm trying to think to myself any example where someone's tone of voice was very off-putting and could be seen as disrespectful. If they had said in kind of a light manner or hey, just so you know, this is where I'm from or this is how I talk, whatever, that totally negates any disrespectful concerns I would have had in that rest of that conversation. So
yes, yeah,
good
definitely.
point. Very good point. So with body language, what do we suggest doing on body language?
Yeah, a lot of those, a lot of those key points we just described apply here in terms of the role play, watching yourself in a mirror, letting people know. You talk a lot with your hands, for example. You might do that. But in terms of some of the specific things you can do, obviously, if you're engaged with a customer, just stop doing other things. Stop playing with the cell phone, stop looking at the computer, stop working on your equipment, stop the paperwork. Because even if you're doing something for the customer, if you haven't told them I'm doing this so I can make sure I get everything documented, if you're just doing it and they don't know why, they perceive you as being disrespectful. So literally just stop other things that you're doing, make that eye contact. We talked about appropriate versus inappropriate eye contact earlier. Nod periodically, shows you're engaged. It shows you're not that brick wall. We already talked about documenting a few things. And then some things people don't really think about a whole lot is, along with having some open arms, literally as opposed to cross arms, having some open arms or having your hands kind of cupped together as you're listening to the other individual, make sure you have good posture. Make sure if they're talking, you might rest your chin on your hand and maybe lean in a little bit to show you're really engaged. So think about some of those things that with your body language are conveying you're focused on nothing but that individual. You care in that moment about nothing but that particular individual's needs. And
the whole body language thing, I was trying to think, obviously everything we're talking about is great for an employee dealing with a customer.
Yes.
But even in an internal organization, employees around one another as coworkers, tone of voice, yes, it's important, but it's probably not as critical because I think employees probably get used to this is the kind of tone of voice that this employee has, and I'm a little more customized to it. I know that just because this person talks monotone doesn't mean they're not interested in what I'm saying or talking to me in a respectful way. Body language, though, still goes a long way, even inside a company with coworkers and people who depend on one another from a customer service standpoint. You could still that distracted fiddling with a cell phone while you're in a meeting, kind of looking pensive with your body language while someone's talking. That still has an impact and can still affect even customer service within an organization outside of employee to customer outside. So
yes, yeah. So there's a slight line, but there is definitely a line between they are doing this because just how they are. They are talking at this rate. They're talking with this volume because that's what they are. But when you're looking at your phone while somebody's speaking, when you are rolling your eyes or you are twiddling the pen and leaning back in your chair with horrible posture, or you're rolling your eyes, that's not just how you are. Yeah. That's you either reacting to the situation or you ignoring the situation. So that's where that line comes in. It's not just who you are. It is how you are conveying that you're not engaged or you're really having some kind of a negative reaction to what's being said at that point.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So weights.
Yeah. So with the wait time. So again, that's one of the four that's a little different in that it's not a direct employee interaction situation, but obviously a very, very big factor of disrespect.
Yeah, and this is one of these where it is more company-centric, a lot of the solutions rather than individual-centric. You talked earlier about how you kind of know if there's wait times. If there is an organization of any size, they know how long people are waiting on the phone to get into their call center or to talk to people. They know what percentage of people abandon their call after they've initiated. They know what the typical time is between somebody calling in and scheduling an appointment and getting that appointment booked. They know if somebody's in the ER, how long they waited until they got registered, how long from when they got registered until when they went back. So, some of this is able to be monitored by the organization through metrics, through reporting, rather than just through customer feedback. So, obviously, one of the things that the organization wants to do is have a really good handle, just based on their internal management reporting, on what actually are the wait times, what are the process times, and look for opportunities to reduce and eliminate wait times. More from an individual employee standpoint, but again, this can be something company-driven, is when you're dealing with wait times, you want to make sure employees are checking in with the customer, especially if there are waits and they are saying they're trying to manage that expectation. This is going to be about a 30-minute process before we can get you back. And if it's going to be longer, they're touching base with that customer or that patient or that individual periodically to manage that expectation. So that's something that can be done to convey respect. Even though the time might convey disrespect, if you're keeping that customer up to date, you're managing that expectation, that conveys respect. If you apologize for the wait, that conveys respect. If you are checking in with the customer at the start of a call or interaction, especially if there's been a long wait. So you know that this particular customer has been waiting 27 minutes on the phone. You might check in before you start the call and try to gauge their emotions at that point, gauge how their day's going, apologize for the wait. If you are in a room and that person's waited 45 minutes to see you, before you come in and say, let me see your paperwork, you try to gauge where they're at emotionally before you begin that interaction. So those are some specific things you can do to try to pull away the potential sense of disrespect.
Okay, gotcha. And I think the biggest one you hit on is just that acknowledgement of it. I mean, I think,
yes,
as long as employees understand, wow, the wait time really kind of got out of control here. We got really backlogged. Things are really, really insane. Acknowledging it and saying, hey, we're sorry for the wait time, or it's just going to be that much longer. I can't tell you the number of times where I've sat through such a long wait experience for something. And when the employee comes on the phone or up to the counter and just says, yes, can I help you? And it's just, there's no acknowledgement of, hey, listen, I'm really sorry for the wait.
Yes.
Then that automatically amplifies that perception of disrespect. It's like, well, you just wasted 45 minutes of my time, what should have been a 5-minute wait time, and there's no acknowledgement of it. And I think that's the biggest thing. So customers would love for the wait time to be fixed, but they also, I think, are pretty understanding when sometimes there is a wait time longer than expected. But you've got to acknowledge it, and you've got to address it and apologize for it, or try to do something to make amends for it.
Yeah, definitely. And that's actually a good segue, some of these principles that you just mentioned, to our final category of conveying respect and avoiding disrespect is actions. And we're going to talk about some principles. And a good principle overall is to think customer first. Customer first, customer first. Like customer over computer. Customer is more important than computer. Person over the phone. The person in front of you is more important than that phone. Customer before coworker. Focus on the customer before the coworker. So all these are about the customer being first. Customer over computer, person over phone, customer before coworker. If you have those principles in mind, then you have a much better chance of conveying respect. Couple other thoughts when you're trying to convey respect, make sure you're reading the customer. A lot of what we're talking about is what we're doing, but you can sometimes get a sense if the customer feels like they're being disrespected. Okay. So make sure you're not just focusing on your own behaviors, but you're kind of reading their behaviors, reading their action, reading their tone of voice. Make sure you're answering their question, confirming your understanding. We use the phrase all the time. I learned years ago in I think it was a DDI customer service course called clarify and confirm. If you're clarifying what their need is and you're confirming or restating it back to them, clarify and confirm, that's an example that you're effectively listening to them. Right. Be patient. If they feel like you're being rushed, that they are going to get ticked off, especially if they went to the website, tried to find the answer, tried to call up, tried to find the answer, got in their car, drove down in the pouring rain, walked into the building, went up the elevator, waited in line 15 minutes. They went through all that effort to get to you, and now they feel like you're rushing them. That's an issue. And finally, this is something to think about. This gets back to the whole student don't criticize in front of their peers, praise in public, and criticize or correct in private. If you praise in public, criticize or correct in private, then they're not going to feel disrespected. But if you are criticizing them, you're correcting them in public in front of peers, that's when the boom happens.
Yeah, I absolutely could see that. I mean, and yes, it's I don't want to say it's a little coddling, because there's some organizations and some leaders I know that say, listen, I want to make example of somebody who really messed up. I need everybody else to know that person messed up. But the problem with that, I think the problem outweighs it, is that, you're reprimanding somebody in public, what could have been the one mistake they've made in the last few months.
Yes.
And it's a level of disrespect where you've now clouded that you've clouded that integrity of that employee in front of everybody else.
Exactly.
So I agree with you. I think it's still, you reprimand in private. You figure out some other ways to make lessons for your other team or things they need to remember from it, but without it penalizing and pointing a finger at one person in a critical fashion, because the dangers much more outweigh what you're trying to accomplish with that. So
yeah, you can break down trust. You could end up getting that person to be passive, because they're like, if I screw up, everybody in the organization is going to know, so I'm just going to do nothing.
Yeah,
and that way I'm going to stay inside my body. That way I'm not going to be made to look bad. Their passion, their energy, their engagement. I know with the Jackson Group, you do a ton of employee engagement-related, climate-related studies. That's a great way to shut down engagement, is if you are criticizing publicly of that employee. And at that point, they become passive. They don't buy in. They don't have the energy. They don't have the passion. And now you have, folks internally who are there, and others start carrying the water for them because they're really not pulling their weight. They become that individual who's disengaged because they were disrespected. Absolutely.
So tone of voice, body language, wait time, and then just some more active ways of showing respect.
Definitely
talking through those things that really can lead to a feeling of disrespect with customers, and some tactics and ideas on ways to make sure we combat that as we go forward.
Definitely.
And again, we're talking about this concept of disrespect, and I think it's just so important to understand that a customer who gets a product shipped to them that has a problem with it and they need to have it shipped back and fixed, that's generally not going to apply disrespect in most situations. I think I think most customers can be pretty okay with that happening as long as the process is smooth and clean and there's some acknowledgement from the company that this happened. But as we're talking about things that actually impact their time, their nature in dealing with a person, and they feel like they're being disrespected, that's really the kind of things we're talking about. It's deeper than rudeness. It's deeper than not having a very clean process. It's deeper than not having the best customer service culture. This is really, truly somebody comes away from an experience feeling lower and feeling like somebody has just dissed them. So, kind of to harken back to the beginning. So it is. It makes perfect sense there. And I can't think of too many things that are more damaging to a customer if that kind of word and mentality got out in the marketplace.
Yeah, and it's interesting because a lot of what you just talked about there reminds me of attributes that we have in a lot of surveys we designed that get at feeling valued. I feel valued by deep. That gets into, do I feel valued by this organization? Do they care about me as a person? Do they care about my business?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Ed, thanks for all the input on the idea of defining and reacting to disrespect and helping avoid it in any customer situations. Now, we always, at the end of our show, have our customer service stories of the month, and today is no exception. We both have a story to share. We will each bring a story to the table. It could be a positive story, could be a negative one that we've experienced in the last 30-some days, and kind of use it as a good lesson out there, positive or negative, for everybody listening. So, Ed, if it's okay with you, I'll go ahead and go first on the story here. I do know why. It seems like most of my customer service stories that I share have to deal with movie theaters. And it's probably because that's where I spend quite a bit of time outside of my house and outside of my office. The movie theater is probably in the third running for a place I will spend my time. So I was on vacation for a very short Easter weekend, and the weather was horrible. So we ended up, I took my boys to go see a movie on a Saturday afternoon when the rain was just pouring and there was really nothing else to do outside. I'm pretty critical in movie theaters. I expect a certain level of experience to really go. I mean, especially with ticket prices going up.
Oh, yes.
I feel like there's got to be some return. And I know that they're competing pretty hard to keep people from just renting a movie and watching it at home. So my thinking is if I'm going to pay $10 a ticket, to see a movie, I really need something better experience-wise. And so we attended the theater near the vacation spot where we were. I'd never been there before. And it was not good. It was a pretty rotten experience. And I'll tell you why. I'm even going to set aside staff experiences because the staff were just not terribly pleasant. They weren't really accommodating. This was all a process thing. You've got a Saturday afternoon on a rainy beach weekend, okay? Which right away that ought to tell you, hey, listen, the weather's bad. People are probably going to come into the movie theater because there's not much to do if you can't get outside. Mm-hmm. You've got a big blockbuster movie opening that weekend. That ought to be another sign to you that, hey, we could experience a little bit of a crowd, But we show up at this movie theater. We show up about 15 minutes before the showtime, and we're promptly told after standing in line for quite a while. We were actually in line for about 15 minutes, and we were told as we got to the front of the line, yeah, we just sold out the show. Okay, that's frustrating enough. When is the next show? Oh, it's in 30 minutes. Okay, fine. We can wait for that. The problem is that at that point, they're basically saying, okay, we'll buy your ticket, and then you basically just have to stand in this area because we're not able to open up the rest of our lobby and we don't have the other concession stands open. Even though there are multiple stations all throughout this building where people could buy concessions, they have one lane open with staff. So basically the line is wrapping multiple back and forths in this line, filling up the lobby. We don't have any room to sit down or anywhere to wait. So we're basically waiting for 30 minutes standing up against the wall. And the place is crowded. It's understaffed. And the whole time I'm thinking to myself, the weather forecast has been saying rain for a few days now. You've got multiple cash registers. You've got multiple places people could buy concessions. You've got ways you could let people into other parts of the theater without them jumping into a movie theater for free. I mean, there's ways to control this. But it was very obvious from the experience that they weren't really willing to put any extra effort into it. These are the people we have working. This is what we're going to do. And everybody else just kind of has to deal with it. And unfortunately, that's a mentality that a lot of places run into when, this is just, people want to come see this movie, so they're just going to have to kind of deal with it. Is a little bit of that perceived mentality you get from it. I always find it so frustrating when I see multiple concession stands available, just not manned, because they just didn't think ahead and actually get any staff people to work there. So instead, everybody gets forced into one line, which takes 3 times as long to go through. So it's just that whole experience of, leading up to it. My boys and I are going into the movie now with a very sour experience. I mean, we're already down about it and frustrated because we've had to stand against the wall in a crowded place. We didn't even try to get in the concession stand line because we saw how long it was. Oh, geez. So it was frustrating. And again, it was more process driven than it was personality. We could deal with the people not being, we've gotten used to movie theater employees not always being the most pleasant employees whenever we go places. But the process, just not thinking ahead that, wow, we could have a lot of people this weekend. We kind of need to do some extra steps to make sure everybody has a really great experience. And there's just not that mentality that we had there. So anyway, frustrating, disappointing, and unfortunately it clouds my experience there. I have no desire to go back to that theater, even if that was just a one bad day they had. I don't know that. I assume that's the way they are every day. So now I have no desire to go back.
Yeah, it's, my conclusion from that is they just don't care.
Right.
Because if they cared, they would do 2 things. They would anticipate and they would adjust. Mm-hmm. So they would anticipate what could happen, be a little bit forward looking, view it from the customer's perspective, and then they would adjust when certain situations arose that maybe they didn't anticipate, and they did neither of those. So they didn't do the pre-planning anticipation. They didn't do the in the moment adjustment. So to some extent, I just get the impression they just don't care.
That's definitely the impression you get after going through something like that. And it happens at restaurants. It happens at other places where, you just think to yourself, well, why weren't you thinking that this could be a crowded experience? Or why weren't you thinking of different ways to help flow the traffic if it did get busy? And I just don't think it should have been a real big surprise to anybody at that point. And, if it is a surprise, let's say a big weather storm comes out of nowhere and does force a lot of people inside at the last minute and totally unexpected, not on the weather forecast. A movie is so much more successful and popular than anybody thought it could possibly be. You acknowledge it. You say, hey, listen, we're really busy today. Mm-hmm. We're sorry. We did not expect this kind of crowd. Here's what we're going to do to try to make the process as smooth as possible. Show some energy that you're at least working on it. I don't expect them to be miracle workers and somehow just miraculously have 5 more staff people show up out of nowhere and lines just get shortened everywhere. But acknowledge it, maybe give out some little freebies of people waiting in line for a long time, or do something to just make them feel like what they're going through. And I think that's the biggest challenge there.
And you just give me an idea for a tip of the week, Alan.
Hey,
that's
wonderful.
Outstanding.
I like it.
Thank you.
I love it. Well, Ed, what's your story?
Mine's a little bit of a lessons learned as opposed to one specific story. This podcast, about 10 years ago, my family was in car transition mode. We had one really old car and one really bad car. So we needed to buy a new car. In 2006, we bought a car from a gentleman named Angel. We had a great purchase experience with Angel. He really did a good job. He wasn't the stereotypical, negativity that you hear about car salesmen. The next year, we decided to transition our other car. So we bought another car, and we also bought that from Angel.
Okay.
Segueing to a slightly different story. Most years, we take a vacation to the beach when we take our annual summer vacation. And we always book through the same travel or rental agency. And this week, my wife called to book the location for this year's trip. And she waited until midweek to contact the agency because she knew her agent's schedule. And she wanted to make sure she was talking to her agent. And her agent is a lady named Angel. And Angel was out early this week. And my wife knew that and knew that Angel would be in starting Wednesday, I believe it was. So my wife books our summer vacations through Angel every year because she has a consistently great experience with Angel. So there's 2 lessons learned. One is that if you provide a very consistent experience, a very predictable experience, a very good experience, and you have a great rapport with the customer, that can lead to repeat business.
Absolutely.
Second lesson is look for people named Angel.
I was going to say, that's really interesting. So you guys have had 2 angels floating over you, with positive experiences. That's nice.
Yeah. One is a male here in Charlotte, and the other is a female somewhere near Charleston, I think it is. But that was kind of interesting. Both named Angel.
Well, think about just how many times we will go to a particular person, regardless of the company, just because of the experience we had with them before.
Yes.
Now, I could see some organizations saying, well, that's a little dangerous because we want them to be coming to any of the employees at our organization.
Yes.
But I think it's okay, personally, to have some superstar employees that get you into the organization because, at least they can start developing a relationship with the whole company, but you've got to have that personality to get them in, and I think that's okay.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, and then, of course, you're talking about people that may be self-employed or independent individuals, and then in that case, absolutely, you want that name recognition. You want people knowing that you personally are someone who's going to take care of them. So that's really important.
So our stories were about anticipating, acknowledging, adjusting, and angels.
Angels. I like it. Very, very nice. Yes. So that's been our show for today, defining and reacting and managing this concept of disrespect and how to avoid that. An important thing, and we hope everybody will work on with their own employees and team members and people in the organization, because it can be a very, very damaging thing for an organization to have that word disrespect floating out there. Ed Gagnon is with Customer Service Solutions, and Ed, people can still find your company at cssamerica.com.
Yes.
And that's also where they can sign up for email newsletters and tip of the week, which you mentioned. So maybe I'll see my inspiration coming across the tip of the week in the coming weeks.
You just may.
Absolutely. There are blog posts. There's other ways to contact Ed or any of his associates at Customer Service Solutions. So it's cssamerica.com. cssamerica, all one word, .com. And then I'm with the Jackson Group, a firm handling employee and customer satisfaction and engagement surveys, both in the healthcare industry as well as some other industries outside of healthcare. You can learn more about us at thejacksongroup.com. THE jacksongroup.com, all one word on that middle part of the web address. So with that, we're going to sign off. Thanks for listening to Stepping Up Service here on themesh.tv. Again, please check out our other shows or past episodes of this show at your own convenience online anytime you'd like at themesh.tv. For Stepping Up Service, this is Alan Jackson signing off. Ed, thanks a lot. Have a great weekend.
Thanks. You too, Alan.
All right.
Enjoy
Take care,
it.
everyone. All right. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to The Mesh, an online media network of shows and programs ranging from business to arts, sports to entertainment, music to community. All programs are available on the website as well as through iTunes and YouTube. Check us out online at themesh.tv. Discover other network shows and give us feedback on what you just heard.